Welcome to this episode of Out of the Best Books, the podcast where we deep dive into classic literature and have conversations about what we've learned and discovered along the way. We love all things books and reading, and we want to share our love of the classics with you. We hope to inspire you to read along with us and join in the conversation. I'm Laura.
And I'm Amity. Let's get started. We're really excited about this episode today because we are going to be talking all about one of England's most well-known worldwide and prolific authors, Charles Dickens. And the reason that we're doing that is because next week, we're going to start talking about what he called his best story, The Tale of Two Cities. And I'm really excited about that as well, because even though he calls it his best story, and it is fairly well known, it's not like, to me, I don't think it's quite on the level of like, obviously A Christmas Carol, Oliver Twist, Great Expectations. Like, people know it, but I think that those may be some of the more well-known ones. Anyway, so we're going to talk all about Charles Dickens. We're going to talk a little bit about Tale of Two Cities. And yeah, I just hope it's going to be a really good intro for next.
Can I admit something?
Yes.
I'm scared.
I'm
scared to read this book. I'm scared to read this book. I read the plot, but I've never read it. The only Charles Dickens book I've ever read was Great Expectations. And I read the plot summary this week and I was like, oh my gosh. Oh, this is hard. Like, I thought
it is.
I thought Far From the Madding Crowd was hard. No.
Yeah.
This is going to be hard.
This one is next level hard for sure. But it'll be so good. And I think it could be really helpful because I think a lot of people probably find it really hard. So for us to read it and then hopefully like bring it to like layman's terms and modern English and things like that, hopefully people can understand it. And just because we do doesn't mean that we are nailing every part of it 100%. Like, there's still a lot open for people to read, and maybe they'll interpret it slightly differently, and that's fine. But hopefully it'll give a good start for a lot of people.
So yeah, I just want everybody to know, if you're scared, so am I.
And me too, because I was thinking, like, I have read several of Charles Dickens books, not as many as I should. And I realized as I was studying about him that I need to just like dive into several more. But I read A Tale of Two Cities many years ago. I think I've read it twice before this. And it was many years ago. And this was in my period of time that I've talked about before when I knew that it was really important to read the classics, did not understand anything as I was reading. Like, I really got to the end. I'm like, well, the thing about it is A Tale of Two Cities, it probably has two lines that are like well known across, everything. Like, whether you've read any Dickens or not, you probably know the phrase, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. And you may also know the phrase at the very end of the book, it is a far, far better thing that I do now than I have ever done. But what happens in between? It was like, I'm reading this. I don't know what's going on. And then I knew it was about the French Revolution, and there's a love story, kind of love triangle, and that's
about it. I know. We got this. We can do this together.
Time around is much better for sure. And it does, hopefully that does give some hope to people who struggle now. Like, it is a progression and there's a learning curve, but you can, like, as you make yourself do it and slow down and force yourself to try to understand the classics, you get to the point where you eventually can do.
Yep.
So
it's all about practice. That's my theory.
Exactly. Like everything else.
Yeah.
All right. So first of all, Charles Dickens was the most popular novelist of the 19th century, and I think that he's probably would still be up there today. He was born February 7th, 1812, at Landport in Portsea in England. Of course, his parents were John Dickens and Elizabeth Barrow, and he was the second of 8 children. 2 of his siblings, unfortunately, died when they were very young, as so commonly happened back then. Something really interesting. So I read part of his biography, which was written by his really good friend, John Forster. And so to me, that is probably one of the best recordings about his life by an outside source, because he was his good friend. He lived during the time. He had a much better idea of context. And so that is a really wonderful source. And so what he said, he quoted Dickens as saying that he was not overly taken care of as a child. And so he didn't really feel like he owed his parents much, which was interesting because as I read and listened to other things about him, it talked about, oh, he loved his parents. They were such wonderful parents. They were a very happy family. And out of his own mouth, it doesn't sound like that was necessarily the case. And it's not that they're a bad family, but he says he wasn't overly taken care of. And I think that he was pretty traumatized as a child, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. So his father was hardworking. He was a clerk for the naval yards there, but that kind of moved him around a bit. And the problem was he overspent his money. So he was constantly in debt. And it was just a very chaotic childhood, I would say. Charles Dickens, he was always very sickly as a child. And that could be in part, maybe there was a little bit of neglect there. There were a lot of children very concerned about money, very stressed, and also living like on the coast. If you're already prone to not being well, that may have contributed to his sort of sickly nature. But it talked about how he would have these spasms. I don't know if it was like seizures or what, but so, and he never really excelled at sports. I think, like cricket or marbles, they considered a sport, or just running and playing with the other boys. I think a lot of that could be contributed to his just sort of sickly nature. But as in like everything in life, that hardship, that downside to his childhood led to an upside, which was that he did spend a lot of time observing the kids that were playing and a lot of time reading. And something he does credit his mother for is teaching him to read. And it doesn't sound like she was like the greatest teacher, but she did spend time every day helping him to read. And so that was a huge blessing. So he read a ton, he observed and watched all these things going on. When he was about 12, his dad actually was thrown into debtor's prison, and a horrible situation. And because his dad was in debtor's prison, of course, women were not really able to provide for their children. But there was like this arrangement where if the father, husband, provider was in debtor's prison, his family could come live with him. It's like, oh, neat. Like you can go live in debtor's prison with your dad.
I thought that was very interesting. Like, yeah, it was like, would you want to?
I know. But maybe they did. And maybe the alternative was living on the street. Like maybe that was the only alternative and he could not get out of debtor's prison until his debt was paid off. It was an amount of about 40 pounds, which at the time would be like huge, right? The only one who was able to go to work was Charles, who was 12 years old. And the only work that he could get as a 12-year-old boy was in a boot shining factory. And so he worked 12 hours a day and made 6 shillings a week.
And he hated it.
He hated it. Like, I can't even imagine. Of course, he's like trying to make that money to help his dad pay off his debt, but like that would take forever at 6 shillings a week. Plus, he didn't live in the debtor's prison with his dad. He paid rent for a little place, like a tiny little room for himself. So here's this sweet 12-year-old little boy whose childhood is over. Yeah. Completely over, And fortunately, before the end, like he worked there for almost a year. Before the end of the year, his father's mother died. So his grandma died, and his father inherited enough money that he was able to pay off his debt. It does make you wonder, like, couldn't the grandma like at least have helped the mom and kids a little bit so they didn't have to live in debtor's prison? Like,
yeah,
come on.
Or given him the money then.
given them the money then. I mean, like it sounds like he did have a habit of like overspending, always being in debt. And so maybe after a time she was just like, you're on your own, pal. But what about the kids and the wife who they are literally helpless, But anyway, regardless, she passes away. He inherits the money, pays it all off, and they're able to get out of debtor's prison. So, but then this is a part that I think would have traumatized him for life, because after they get out of debtor's prison, Charles is like, I get to go live with my family and I don't have to work in this blasted place anymore. But his mom said, no, we need the extra money. So Charles needs to stay doing that. And like that to me would probably be one of the most damaging parts of this whole scenario is like, my mom doesn't care about me, So that would be awful.
Yeah, she probably, it was probably more deep than you know what I mean? Like, she's like, well, we have to eat or whatever. So he has to do this. I'm sorry. But still, as a kid, you're like, wait a second.
Yeah. You have your perspective. Yes, exactly. And that's probably exactly what he felt like, was a human sacrifice, and no kid wants to feel that way. It was such a hard time, but all of this comes into his books. And that's what's so interesting. And that's why I think it's important to talk about his childhood, is because like you see it all come out in his books. And he gained so much empathy for people of that plight because he'd been there. And he also like learned from his father and learned that that's not where he ever wanted to be. And so he worked his butt off. And there was some trauma there. So he like worked harder than was probably necessary after a time, after he was like world famous, had loads of money, but he kept working super hard because he did not ever want to be where his father was. I think it was an extremely formative and traumatizing time. Age 15, he became apprenticed to an attorney as a junior law clerk. Well, I don't know if apprenticeship would be the right thing, but I think basically an apprenticeship. Through that, he learned shorthand, and that's kind of where his writing career began, because not only was he like writing down everything that was happening and recording it, but he also observed everybody that came in to this law clerk, to the attorney, and he would like write, like describe what they looked like, describe their stories, and then make up other stories about them. So that's kind of where everything began. He initially wanted to be an actor, and he thought that's where his life was going to take him. He loved to perform. He would like jump up on tables at taverns and like sing and dance and things like that. And he was quite the little actor, but he auditioned for a play at Covent Gardens, which was kind of a big deal at the time. And he ended up getting really sick and wasn't able to make it to the audition. And so he didn't get the spot, and they never let him try again. And so his dream of being an actor but he did like get other opportunities later on. He actually instead became a journalist at the Morning Chronicle. So he started like writing for real at a newspaper.
I loved that he left school when he became an apprentice for the law clerk, and he loved to, he was a voracious reader. And so that's probably what like kept his education going. And anyways, I love it when I hear that people are voracious readers.
Yeah. And that they do so well because of it. Like, it really is a testament to the fact that like reading is the door to almost everything. Like, whatever you want to do, reading will get you there in a better way, I think. So,
do you know what his first novel was?
In 1833, so at that point he would have been 21, he submitted his first story, A Dinner at Poplar Park, to the London periodical Monthly Magazine. I hope that I'm going to tell this right. Okay. In 1836, so he's about 24, he had been doing these submissions for the magazine called Sketches by Boz. So that was sort of like his nom de plume, right? And they got really, really popular. And after a certain time, it became the Pickwick Papers. is what it was renamed, if I'm recalling and reading that right.
I thought the Pickwick Papers was one of his first novels. Is that what was in my head? I didn't know if that was right. But...
Okay, so the success of Sketches by Boz led to a proposal from publishers for Dickens to supply text plus illustrations in a monthly letterpress. The resulting story became the Pickwick Papers. So it got to where the Pickwick Papers became so incredibly popular. So they were like monthly installments, I believe. And they got to where they were selling 40,000 copies a month. That is so many, especially at a time when like their method of publishing was pretty rudimentary compared to what it is today. 40,000 copies a month. And that he did. So at the age of 25, he was very successful, very famous, and quite wealthy. So he was doing really well for himself. And then from there, he just started writing and writing. He had some really in here too. He also met and married his wife, Catherine Hogarth. He had fallen in love with another lady named Mariah, but that didn't work out because he was not wealthy or successful at the time. And so her father was like, no, you don't get to marry him. But so then he did meet and marry Catherine Hogarth. He's writing and writing and doing really well. He did write one that was kind of a bomb, and he was like in debt to his publishers. And so he's kind of freaking out. And so they told him, he wanted to write a book for people's Christmas tray. And he knew that it needed to be something that would bring in money. And thus A Christmas Carol was born. So that was in about 1843. And it really, the timing could not have been more perfect because that was the same year as the first Christmas card. There's a brand new royal family, Victoria and Albert, who like Albert brought the Christmas tree to England. And so just this idea of the Christmas traditions and everybody going back to this childlike love of Christmas and all those things, it just really worked for the time. And so it became immensely popular and did really well. And so anyway, he kept writing and writing. And he and his wife, Catherine, had 10 children. And as far as I can tell, none of them passed away early. I didn't read anything about that. But he's somebody that he had several books going at a time, which I can't even fathom. I don't think I would love to talk to some like prolific authors and see if that is something that they do. Because I mean, I could imagine having other ideas for things, but we're talking like he's writing and has installments going out. And that's something it talked about too. Like, it's just how amazing that was, that it brought literature to everybody and just the everyday person, because this idea of having installments in magazines and newspapers, because for just like a shilling, they could get part of a story. Where to get a whole book that was leather bound, it was only the very rich who could afford something like that. So they were able to read great literature for pretty cheap. So it was really an amazing opportunity for people. He is somebody who did his research by walking out and like being among the people he was writing about. So he went to the workhouses and he went to the prisons and he went to like the slums. He affected social reform like nobody else at that time, because he didn't like the Victorian era. He felt like the Industrial Revolution made England very dirty, very dark, very crass. It was this idea of the child labor and the fact that there's these little children laboring in factories for hours and hours for no pay, and it was very dangerous, very fatal for many of them. And there was just like no hope. And once people went to workhouses, they knew there was no way out. But that was like their very last straw. Like, that's why so many times in his books and in other places, it'll be like we would rather die than go to a workhouse, because they would. It was like that was the end if they ended up in a workhouse. There was no way out of that. And so he really tried to bring light to that, and to also show, like through Oliver Twist and other things, that like it's bad things don't just happen to bad people. Bad things happen to good people. You can be a hardworking, good person, and bad things can happen to you. And it's not necessarily fair. It's just not fair that like their life is, they're subject to abuse and torture and starvation and all these things just because they've fallen on hard times. There's like no hope for them. And he really saw the plight of women too, and how if their husband died, there was nothing for them. A lot of them were women who were like housewives and they knew how to manage a household, but that is not bringing income to support their children. So they had no skills to support their children. So later on, when he had money, he actually established a home called, I don't know. I guess I didn't write it down, but it was just a home for homeless women, and they could go there and they could learn skills that would help them to earn money to support themselves and their families. Another thing is that basically, if you ever knew Charles Dickens in your life, you would probably end up in one of his books, because he wrote about like everybody, like any character, especially any star character. It was probably somebody in Dickens' life. And be worried if there's a bad guy in there, like, and you knew Dickens, because you might be the bad guy. Later on in his life, he and his wife have been married for over 20 years, and he just decided that he was kind of done with their marriage. Like I think he really struggled with a lot of depression, a lot of sadness, like never really being satisfied. He had achieved everything he set out to achieve. He had a family, he had a large home, he had lots of children. He was just well known all throughout the world. Like he did these tours all over Europe and in America. And he even got to do acting, and he would also do like these read aloud things in front of crowds. So, and he'd published all these books and did very well. He had reached like all of his goals, and he was still dissatisfied and not happy. And so he kind of decided to blame that on his marriage. And I don't know, because I'm not there.
I read that he was like bored with her, like she just wasn't exciting to him. And I mean, I think of that as like, I mean, I don't know, because I'm not a celebrity or married to a celebrity, but like maybe, you know, that could happen in that kind of a relationship, right? Like he was this important celebrity, and you know, maybe it went to his head. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that definitely could have a lot to do with it. And by all accounts, she was a sweet woman, but not super intelligent. She was quite chubby, and it sounds like he put a lot of stock into things like that. And so maybe not super attracted to her, maybe wasn't like excited by her, and all these things sound like super selfish, but apparently to him they were very real.
And he had an affair, right, with this actress, and I think he was quite young.
She was 19 and he was like 45.
Yeah. These days, though, that would not fly.
No.
I mean, guess legally
it happens. Like, again, look at the celebrities. Good grief. Yeah. But yeah, pretty nasty. And he did get a legal separation from his wife. And basically, he had all of his children come live with him and didn't want them to contact her at all. Oh. And so it's like he kind of turned into a huge jerk.
Yeah.
And
here he is writing about like change and like, you know, poor people who can't get out of their situations and the poor people, and right. And then he changes.
Totally. Yeah, totally puts his children in an awful situation. Now, I think that his wife, like he put her in a nice home and everything, but like the rest of it was, I mean, she may as well have been in a prison. Like that would be just awful. Because like after his death, almost all the children like had contact with their mother again. Like they reconnected with her. So I don't know, like there could be more to it. Maybe she was not a nice lady.
Yeah, we don't know.
Like, because it does make you wonder, like, how are you, but men had so much more say and power at that point in time. So maybe that's how it happened, because it does make you wonder, like, how is he able to keep all of his children completely away from her?
Yeah.
For such a long time. I don't know. But especially into adulthood, you would think that, because a lot of them would have been adults before he died. So why?
I think I read somewhere that his children were really like entitled and spoiled.
That could be.
I don't know if that would have anything to do with it, but like I kind of thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
But I mean, they grew up wealthy, probably, right?
Yeah, it sounds like it. I mean, he's wealthy by the time he's 25.
Yeah.
So his children, they were fine. They were doing really well their whole life. So,
well, I have some interesting facts about him. So I don't know. I thought these were fascinating.
Awesome. Okay.
I don't know. These are just random, but okay. The first one is he had insomnia. And so he always slept facing north because he thought it would help his insomnia. And he always wrote facing north.
Oh, interesting.
He worked on his novels. I know. Isn't that interesting? It's kind of, maybe he was superstitious or a little bit or something. He was almost killed in a train accident. So 5 years to the day before he died, he was in a train accident that derailed. And he lived, and he was actually not injured. But I mean, I guess so. Almost killed in a train accident is probably not the right words, but he was in a train accident, which is very weird.
Accident would be horrifying because car accidents are like so scary.
Yes.
A train, though, is like so huge. There's just so much more power.
It's all tied together.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine. Okay, this is interesting. So, I can't remember what dictionary, probably, anyways, one of the dictionaries credits him with these words that he made up. A buzz.
Oh, cool.
That's kind of interesting. Like, it's all a buzz. I don't know. The creeps. You use that all the time?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. Flummox.
Oh, and that he made that up. It's such a good word. I love it. Cool.
And then the last one is devil may care.
Really? That's super. And that one is definitely
one
highly used, and or at least that we like read in other things or hear in movies or whatever, even if okay, like today it would be kind of funny if we used that just in our regular
now.
Devil may care. Like I feel like we would have to give it a little bit of a British accent if we said it. But
yeah, that's true. Okay, so then we talked about how he had 10 children and he had nicknames for each of his children, and some of his nicknames were Chicken Stalker.
Oh,
like Stalker.
Yeah.
Lucifer Box. And the last one is Skittles.
Maybe interesting. Maybe that's where Skittles came
maybe
from.
I thought that was cute. Okay, he was fascinated with hypnotism, and he would practice it. He would experiment on his wife and children.
Oh my gosh. Interesting.
And he thought it could cure anxiety.
Well, maybe he thought it would cure insomnia too.
Yeah. I can't even imagine like practicing hypnotism on somebody.
That's so funny.
I've tried to do hypnotism, like be hypnotized, and I'm like not capable of it. So did he have OCD? That people thought he might have had OCD. So he was constantly combing his hair. He constantly rearranged his furniture. And the last thing is he was constantly looking at himself in the mirror.
Oh, really? Interesting.
I have family members that do that. Like I have 2 in my immediate family that I'm like, you guys are always looking in the mirror. Like they can't walk by a mirror without being like, it's funny.
Like, is that me? I'm so impressed.
I know. And that's almost the face they give themselves in the mirror. It's like, wow, look at me. I'm not gonna rat out who they are.
Is that really me? I love it.
But they know who they are. Okay. And then the last one was his favorite novel he wrote was David Copperfield. And that it was the most autobiographical.
Yes.
And I read, I'll talk about some other stuff later, but that like it was also in first person.
Yes. And
written in first person.
Yeah. And so my thought with that is that I think it'd be really interesting to read both John Forster's biography of Charles Dickens, he who knew him personally and was his friend, next to David Copperfield, which is very autobiographical, and
I
to
was
get
watching
his inner thoughts, you know, because I think that's really what you're going to get there.
I was watching some YouTube videos about him, and there was this guy that was showing some stuff from like one of his museums, but in England that they have set up for him. And they were showing like a copy of one of the books that was owned by Charles Dickens' father. I think he said it was illustrated by John Forster, who was his personal friend.
Oh, interesting. That's cool. Okay.
Did you know he was an illustrator? Or is that like...
I didn't know he was an illustrator. I know that with the Pickwick Papers, the original illustrator with that, he did not like him. He didn't want him to illustrate the Pickwick Papers. And that guy actually ended up committing suicide. And so they hired somebody else who Charles Dickens really liked. I'm not sure if it was John Forster or not.
No, I think that's the name. It was definitely a John that illustrated that book. And they were talking about how I think it was a Christmas Carol. That was the book. And it was originally printed in red and green, and Charles Dickens didn't like it, and so he changed it to red and blue.
Oh,
they wanted it red and green for Christmas, and then
no,
and so red the pictures,
interesting. Oh, cute. Very interesting. Well,
yeah, I would say like if you're, I mean, like you can go on YouTube and watch so many little videos, 5-minute videos or whatever about him. I mean, anything you want, right? In life, but like Charles Dickens and like all of his books, and it's kind of incredible. So yeah, like they did some tours of some of the museums and showed the houses where he lived in, and it's kind of interesting.
That's really cool. I will say though that like if I had more time, I would have just gone through and read the entire biography written by John Forster. But even just in the little bit I was able to read, and then going to some of the YouTube videos, I was like, they didn't get that quite right. Oh, because it kind of disagrees with, well, not everything. Like a lot of it is, I think it probably is right. But just things like I said, you know, they kind of assumed that he had a very happy family life and things, but he didn't.
Yeah.
And that, you know, just in the things that he told his friend John Forster and things that he knew, sounds like he did not.
Did John Forster write it after his death? After Charles Dickens died?
That's a great question. Because I know that
he died pretty young. I mean, like he was 58, which is
it's relatively young. It is. He does remain one of the most beloved and respected authors of all time. And in fact, there's some other highly respected authors, Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, Faulkner, all these others who are so well known that they got their inspiration from Charles Dickens. He influenced a lot of people. And so it's like, you know, there's so many people that have their demons. And for him, his demons drove him. And people have their weaknesses, and they can still contribute good things to the world. They can still help the rest of us be better and do better, you know, despite their weaknesses. Like God uses everybody.
I think a lot of times your weaknesses are what make you have strengths in other areas, actually. Like, if that makes sense.
Oh, absolutely.
Like I look at kids with, you know, you might say special needs, right? Like maybe they're on the autism spectrum, and so they struggle with certain maybe social things or like understanding the world, but then they're so gifted in other areas. And so those people a lot of times are what brings us like beauty in literature and music, and you know.
Like, absolutely.
Anyways,
and really, like if you start looking at the lives of a lot of authors, poets, they're pretty racked with trauma and sadness, and
they're tormented
for sure. But we get so much beauty from that. And so I think that's a huge lesson. Like, don't discount anybody just because maybe they have some imperfect parts. anyway.
Yeah, everybody has something to contribute, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have 10, 9, 10. I have 10 tips for how to read Dickens. And I thought they were really funny. Okay, so the first one is don't take him too seriously. So he wanted to write books that a lot of people would read. So he wanted to write popular things. And he read, like you said, he wrote them for like in serial form. So they would come out in publications, like what you said, once a month, right?
Yeah.
Or something.
It depended. Later on, he printed things that were like every week.
Wow.
But larger things were monthly.
Yes. So he's very funny and he's trying to be funny. And so you can't take him too seriously. And it kind of reminded me a little bit of Far From the Madding Crowd, like Thomas Hardy. I mean, he's funny. And like, when you really when you really read it deeply, you're like, this is really funny, you know?
Yeah.
You could miss it because if you're surface reading or whatever, but anyways, so that's one thing. Don't take him too seriously. The second thing was, now we are totally not doing this correctly. Start with either David Copperfield or Great Expectations because they're written in first person and there's less like added characters and, you know, it kind of follows one character all the way through. Or A Christmas Carol. That was another one that you could start with. So yes.
Yeah, I would agree with that, but
I'm sorry. I didn't know that when I was like, let's do A Tale of Two Cities.
You know what? Like, dive in. Why not?
Okay. Number 3 is don't be scared by the length. And the reason they're long is because they were published in these like monthly magazines, whatever. Okay. So that goes into number 4, which is take your time. Give it time. Don't, you know, it's hard to just sit down and read a Dickens novel from start to finish. Like, you know, it's something you can read slowly. And I think that's kind of the idea of what we're doing here is like, when we present a book, we're doing just a few chapters a week. And it's so good to like, just slowly read them each week, just read a few chapters and, you know, then let it digest. Do read a full chapter at a time, or you could even look up how they were published and read them in that cluster. Like, I know that
that's a good idea.
Chapters 1 through 3 were published in the same edition of the magazine or newspaper. Okay. Number 5, don't worry about all the minor characters. This is funny. So it's going to take a while to get into his novels, like probably 10 to 12 chapters or whatever. And he wrote these in like, you would read one, you know, a little installment, and then a month later you'd read another installment. And so he'll remind you of the minor characters later because it may have been 3 or 4 months since you've encountered them. So don't let that bog you down. You don't need to like make a list or a chart to figure out who people are.
Just remember he was a brilliant writer. Writing for people, he knew his audience. And so, we don't have to be intimidated by it. Like, he's taking care of us as his readers, which is kind of an amazing. He does, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah, I love number 6. Charles Dickens is weird.
True.
Don't forget that. So, like, as you're reading, you're like, oh yeah, he's weird. That's why this is in here. That reminds me of, I mentioned this in our episode when we talked about our top 10 classic books, when we read Great Expectations in high school. And the only thing I can remember about it was like the father putting his head on the back wall and there was like a grease spot laying, you know, stuck there. I mean, that's weird.
Yeah. Like that detail. You're like, really?
Yeah. That's the only thing I remember for that whole story. I think the teacher made a big deal out of it, which is I remembered it. Okay, number 7, don't get bogged down by the language or the cultural references. Just try to like keep going.
Yeah.
Number 8, try it on audio.
Yeah.
So his writing was meant to be read aloud because a lot of people didn't read at that time.
Yeah.
So he knew that it was going to be read out loud. And like audio helps because there's different accents. They use different voices for different characters. And sometimes he writes in dialect, which is hard to read on the
page. And you know that the narrators have generally done their research, and so they're going to read it as close to the way as he would want it read as they possibly can if they're a good narrator.
Yeah.
And most of them are. So yeah, that's
I think about like, do you ever read a book or listen to a book on audio and it's like, maybe it's written about an African woman and they didn't use like a narrator that has an African accent. And it's so annoying.
Like, yeah, well, or anything. I remember listening to a book years ago. It was like a Welsh mystery, but it was like an American girl who goes to Wales, and they said the Welsh town names correctly, but other than that, there were no accents. I was like,
it's missing something.
Yeah, you can't go to Wales and nobody has an accent.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I just love it because, and when you're reading books like this, usually it's a British narrator. I mean, probably 98% of the time it's a British narrator.
Yeah. Yeah.
You get in the like whole feeling and, atmosphere of what you're reading. Okay. Number 9 is try a screen adaptation.
Yes.
Sometimes though, those the humor doesn't come across. So that people don't, whoever's producing these does not understand the humor that Dickens is trying to portray. But there was like a 2020 version of David Copperfield, I think.
I saw that. Well, I haven't watched it, but I saw that there was that. And I'd like to go check it out. I remember watching an adaptation of Great Expectations and I thought it was really good. I thought they did a good job of it. The kid who plays Pip is like kind of this pretty boy character, and you're like, what?
I read that this 2020 version of David Copperfield is like the first one that they actually got the humor. Like they were able to portray it. So
yeah, I'd love to check it out. And as far as, because A Christmas Carol has probably arguably been one that's been done maybe more than any other book to movie adaptation.
Yes.
But Little Women is probably right up there. But my personal favorite is the one from, I think it's 1983, but George C. Scott plays Ebenezer Scrooge. It is like, to me, far and away the best one. So good.
We were watching one this Christmas, like on a free, something on the Roku channel, free or whatever. Mm-hmm. And it was very old. I wonder if it seemed like it probably was like 1983.
Oh, really?
It's amazing how old 1983 looks now. Or even like
I know
1999 or
yeah, that's true. Although I feel like the 90s was like maybe one of the worst decades. So some of the 90s movies like look older than even some 70s movies. Okay, that's not true. 70s were pretty bad. But yeah, they do look, a lot of them look older.
Yeah, we were just talking about The Princess Bride. Sydney looked it up today and it came out in 1986. So maybe not. I bet you what I was watching was from like the 60s because it didn't look that bad. I mean, I'm picturing Princess Bride. It wasn't, anyways, it wasn't that bad. Okay, the last one is, it's okay if you don't like Dickens.
You have permission.
Yes.
That is true.
Give it a try. If you don't like it, just listen to us. We'll tell you about it.
Yes.
You don't have to read it. And then you'll know the story.
But also don't like brush it off and just say, well, this is dumb. Because that's one of the most frustrating phrases that I ever hear from people. I just don't like it. It's dumb. And it's like, but it's not dumb. You don't have to like it, but it's not dumb.
I guess what I would say is kind of give one of his novels a really good try.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And then decide like, I don't like it or whatever, if you want to. I mean, I decided years ago that I don't like Jane Austen, but I'm going to give it a try and we're going to,
awesome.
I mean, we're going to do it, but I don't know. It's okay if you don't like him. He might not be for you.
That's true.
He might be too weird. I don't know.
And in some cases, it's like, it's pretty dark. Like there's some dark things, but there was a lot of purpose and intent behind that to really bring attention to some of those things and to make people who are pretty uppity go, this could happen to me. So maybe I need to sit up and pay attention. So here's a few of his sort of best sellers, the most notable that people would probably know. So there's the Pickwick Papers, Oliver Twist, Nicholas Nickleby, A Christmas Carol, David Copperfield, Bleak House, Little Dorrit, A Tale of Two Cities, and Great Expectations.
I was going to ask you which ones have you read?
Okay, so I have done the Pickwick Papers, A Christmas Carol, A Tale of Two Cities, and Great Expectations. So I have several that I had started Bleak House, and then I was not in a headspace for it because it is it's first of all, it's huge. It's so big. Like all of his books are big, but that one is so big.
Well, I told you already. I only read Great Expectations, and I've read parts of A Christmas Carol. I started it a few times.
Yeah.
Someday I will. We'll do it for the podcast someday, and then I'll read the whole thing.
Yes. Yeah. It's so good, and it's so fun. And one of the reasons that I really love that George C. Scott version is because it stays very true to the story, I think. Okay, so as far as our specific Charles Dickens book, A Tale of Two Cities, this is one of his later books, and he did say that to him it was his best story he had written. So it's all about, obviously, the French Revolution, and it's focusing, the two cities are London and Paris. It's about the years when it talks about the best of times, the worst of times, that is referring to the years leading up to the French Revolution. And where A Christmas Carol is sort of like the quintessential Christmas book, a lot of people consider A Tale of Two Cities sort of the authority on the French Revolution story. So there are, of course, historians who are going to be like, oh, but it's not that accurate. People wouldn't actually behave that way during this much tumult and turbulence and things. But oh well, well over 100 years, and people still consider it one of the best French Revolution stories. One of his purposes in writing it was to remind readers that behind political processes are the individuals involved in them. And so that's something to remember as we read it, because it's a horrible and awful time, but there's real people doing real things. And like I said before, there's a love triangle happening, and there's great sacrifice and great horror. So I think that's all that I really want to say about it right now, because we're going to really dive into it next week.
Yeah, when I read the plot summary, I was like, this is going to be complicated and confusing with a lot of characters, but we're not going to get bogged down by all the characters.
Right. We're going to take it slowly, and it's going to be great.
Yeah, in let's see, 1, 2. There's 8 major characters, and then it looks like a lot of minor ones.
Yes.
Man, not much. Well, about 8. So that's not too bad. Yeah, and I also think it's interesting that the major character, the main character's name is Charles. So yeah, this will be fun. I'm excited. I mean, I'm scared, but I'm also excited. So
this book is divided into 3 books.
Yeah.
And the first book is it's sort of setting up the scene for you, and it's about 6 chapters. So we'll start with that. And then the second book is much longer, so we'll break that one up quite a bit more. But yeah. There's one quote from Charles Dickens that I wanted to end with, unless there's more that you wanted to talk about. But so he said, and I feel like this relates to this is an amazing summation of himself, of all his books, and of life in general. He says, there are dark shadows on the earth, but its lights are stronger in the contrast. And that's so beautiful. It's we don't appreciate how bright lights are unless there is darkness to contrast it with. And so there is darkness in life. There's darkness in people. But a lot of times the goodness outdoes the darkness. I mean, there, like with Charles Dickens, we know that his contributions to the world are incredible and beautiful and full of light. It's only when you dig a little deeper that you find out, oh, he was a man that had some serious issues.
Yeah.
He did. And it doesn't make him a bad person. He just has his dark shadows, but he also has his lights, as we all do.
Yeah, I was gonna say everybody has that.
Yeah.
We just don't often, it's not often aired.
Yeah. Well, we try to hide it.
Yeah. And if we're successful, that's great. Do you have anything you're reading right now?
Yes, I just needed to get on.
Me too. I don't.
Hoopla really quickly.
I was like, who wrote the book I'm reading?
Let's see. Okay. So quick backstory. When we did our top 10 books that we read in 2022, I was like, I don't think I read that many. I don't remember. And the big problem was, like I said, that I hadn't written them down. But since then, I've been like remembering all these books that I read and listened to in 2022. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And those ones would have made the list in place of others. And I'm like, anyway, sad about that. So maybe I'll talk about some of those another time. But one that I started in 2022 and just wasn't able to finish because I lost Hoopla. But now I have it back. So I was like, I'm going to finish it. It's The Four Winds by Kristin Hannah. So excellent. So good. So it's about the Great Depression, which I don't feel like is written about enough. It's one of those kind of like World War II where, I mean, there's a ton written about World War II now, but it took a while, for people to really start writing it. I think it had to skip a generation or two for people to be like, okay, now we can start writing about it. But same thing with the Great Depression, not a ton is written about it. I don't think. I haven't seen very much. But this one I thought was really well done. Of course, there's the Grapes of Wrath. And I felt like in some ways, this was sort of a modern woman's view, the Grapes of Wrath. Anyway, it was very well done. So it's a family in Texas. They're, victims of the Dust Bowl, they don't lose their farm, but they're pretty close to it. And this woman, her husband just up and leaves, and her in-laws are just this amazing Italian couple who are like, you need to leave. You need to take your family to California, because of course they're promised all these wonderful things in California, because her little son is just like dying from all the dust storms. He's literally dying. And so she picks up and leaves. She's like terrified, but goes to California. And as so many of them do, they face the, total discrimination and sort of bigotry put on them by these Californians who just don't get it. But they see these people coming to them from the Dust Bowl as like less than, because they don't understand what it is to lose your farm to things beyond your control,
That's where the term Okies came from.
Absolutely, it is.
Yeah.
And it was very much a demeaning term.
Yep.
And I don't think anybody uses it anymore, but if they did, it would still be a demeaning
I think like my dad, his generation would use that word.
Interesting. Okay.
That's where I've heard it.
That is so funny.
Yeah. Did your parents not use that word?
No. Yeah, they had never used that, and even like my grandparents never did. But so I didn't really learn about it very much until my kids and I were studying all about the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl, and we learned all about this place called Weed Patch Camp, this school that was set up for little kids and their families. So that, and there were no strings attached. It was just like, these kids need a school where they're not going to face this discrimination and things. And so that was a really good book too. Anyway, so yeah, The Four Winds.
Oh, that was
Brave and Courageous Woman. What's up?
It was an excellent book.
I thought it was very excellent.
I think the beginning of that book really like the situation with her and her husband really got my attention. Like I can remember it very clearly. Like,
yes,
she's very wronged by her husband.
Oh,
and yes. And she was plain. He didn't really, she wasn't beautiful. People would tell her she was never going to get married. Nobody could love her. Oh, isn't that true?
Yes.
I'm like, is that true?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it sticks in my mind.
Yeah. And the truth is, like, it's not that she really was horribly plain. I think that she was just fine, but she totally bought into this idea that she was not beautiful, and all of her worth just laid in what she could do, which, I mean, it's not like all of your worth that lies in your looks either. That's not what I'm saying at all. But I think every woman needs to be told that she's beautiful.
Yeah. And not told you aren't. And
and not told that you're plain, or that you're ugly, or that you're never going to get married, that you're never going to amount to anything, which is what she was told constantly.
Yeah. I loved that book.
Yeah.
I loved it. Okay. So I am reading The Bandit Queens by Parini Shroff. I don't love it.
Oh, okay.
Do you ever get to this point where you're listening to a book? Well, I was kind of enjoying it, I think. It was okay. And then I got in a car accident. And I was telling my husband at the hospital, was at the hospital. I'm fine, obviously. But I was telling him I was listening to this really good book. And I guess it was because it was like I was listening to it, and then I got in the accident, and like the battery of the car got scrunched, and so like the book just went off. I don't know. It was like I had forgotten I was listening to it, but now I'm like, I have like 2 hours left of it, and I just like don't want to listen to the rest of it because I'm just not into it.
Interesting.
And I thought I would be. The premise of it, I thought it sounded just like something I would like, and I'd heard about it, raved about. And so I thought, oh, this is gonna be great, but I'm not loving it. So it's about this woman. She's Indian. Her husband just disappeared. And there's all these false rumors that she killed him, which she did not. And you find out later that she didn't. But all of these women in the village start asking her for help killing their husbands because they're abusive, or, like they're horrible men. And so she like helps them, even though she didn't kill her own husband, but she'll like help them and then feel bad about it. And the woman, like the first woman that she helps, is like, what are you talking about? Like, we needed him gone. Like, it's fine. So, I mean, the premise sounds great, but like, as I'm listening to it, I just have no interest. To me, I don't connect with any of the characters. I don't really like any of them. I don't know.
It's just not, it just doesn't.
It's not my thing
for you. Yeah.
But like listening to the plot, I'm like, that sounds great. That sounds like something I would love. I love books about women like that are in a plight like that. Like they're in an abusive
it kind of makes me think of the #1 ladies detective agency.
Yeah.
Mauro Matsue. I loved that book. It was so good. I don't think they ever killed anybody, but she was just really clever. And it was sort of like she just fell into the role. If I remember, it was years ago that I read that book. But anyway.
And I guess that's what I'm saying is there's a lot of potential.
Yeah.
But like I was reading some other comments about it online, and like people also that thought that they would love it, and they were like, I only really connected with the dog. And I was like, yeah. And the dog's name is Bandit. And it's like, I just I have to make myself finish it just because, I mean, why not? I'm like 80% in.
Yeah.
But I don't know if like the car accident threw my brain somewhere else, and it was like, I just don't care about that book anymore. But
well, maybe. Yeah.
It's been quite a week.
Yes.
So anyways, that's what I'm reading. And tomorrow I'm going to force myself to finish it. I do that a lot. I get like 75 or 80% into a book. And so like one week I should just try to finish all the books that I haven't finished. And then
Oh,
maybe.
Well, that would be a way to add a whole lot to your
my list.
Finish list.
Cool.
Seriously.
Yeah.
All right. We're so happy you joined us for this episode. We hope you will join us next week as we discuss book 1 of A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. If you have suggestions for books we should read and discuss, please email us at thebestbookspodcast@gmail.com. We would love it if you would leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts and share our podcast with your friends. We want to inspire and encourage as many people as we can to read out of the best books.
As Thoreau says, read the best books first, or you may not have a chance to read them at all. See you next week.